The glass ceiling. The silence in Dominic Vega's office was oppressive, broken only by the soft ticking of an antique clock and the occasional tap of his manicured fingernail against the glass desk. He studied the woman sitting across from him, with calculating eyes that had intimidated board members and business rivals alike. "Ms. Reed," he said finally, his voice cool and measured. "Your portfolio shows technical skill, but Westmont Developments isn't looking for merely competent architects. We require individuals who command attention and exude confidence. This industry devours the meek." Octavia Reed's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her leather portfolio. At 32, she'd faced countless rejections, but this one stung more sharply. The position at Westmont represented everything she'd worked toward since graduating with honors from Cornell's architecture program. "Mr. Vega," she replied, her voice soft but steady, "I understand your concerns. However, I believe my designs speak with more eloquence than I ever could." Dominic's expression remained impassive. At 40, he'd built Westmont from the ground up, transforming it into the most prestigious development firm in the Northeast. He hadn't achieved this by taking chances on uncertain prospects, no matter how technically skilled. "Perhaps," he conceded, glancing down at her resume once more. "But architecture isn't merely about technical prowess. It's about selling a vision, convincing clients to invest millions in something that exists only in your mind. Your credentials are impressive, but—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes catching on something he'd overlooked. The name field read Octavia Reed, but it was the emergency contact that arrested his attention. Estate of Hector Reed, deceased. Reed. The name echoed through his memory like a thunderclap. "Your father," Dominic said, his tone suddenly altered. "His name was Hector?" Octavia's expression shifted to one of mild surprise. "Yes, he passed away 3 years ago." "Was he ever based in Philadelphia, during the early 2000s? "Yes," she answered, curiosity evident in her voice. "He worked as a financial consultant there until 2006. Did you know him?" Dominic set down her resume with deliberate care, memories cascading through his mind. 15 years ago, he'd been on the verge of bankruptcy, his fledgling real estate venture collapsing under predatory loan terms he'd been too inexperienced to recognize. A chance meeting with a financial consultant named Hector Reed had changed everything. The man had restructured Dominic's debts, connected him with ethical investors, and refused payment, saying only that Dominic should build something meaningful. "I knew him briefly," Dominic replied, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "He was a remarkable man." Something in his tone made Octavia lean forward slightly. "You sound as though he made an impression." "He did." Dominic cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Ms. Reed, I'd like to reconsider your application. Our Essex Square project requires someone with your technical background." The abrupt reversal clearly caught Octavia off guard. Thank you, but may I ask what changed your mind?" Dominic rose from his chair, signaling the end of the interview. "Let's just say I'm willing to look beyond first impressions. My assistant will contact you with details." He extended his hand. "Welcome to Westmont." As Octavia left his office, Dominic turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The empire he'd built stood as a testament to his ruthless determination and business acumen. Few knew how close he'd come to losing everything before he'd even begun, or that a man named Hector Reed had been his salvation. Now that man's daughter had walked into his life, unaware of their connection. The debt Dominic had carried for 15 years, the debt he'd never been able to repay, suddenly had a face and a name: Octavia Reed. The question now was what to do about it. Shadows of the past. Dominic stood at the edge of the company's rooftop garden, watching the sunset paint Manhattan's skyline in hues of amber and gold. 2 weeks had passed since he'd hired Octavia Reed, and the decision continued to haunt him. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Vega?" Her voice cut through his thoughts. He turned to find her standing a respectful distance away, portfolio clutched to her chest like armor. Though still reserved, she'd settled into her role with quiet competence that had already earned her grudging respect from the senior design team. "Yes," he replied, gesturing to the seating area. "I wanted to discuss your proposal for the Essex Square atrium." They sat across from each other, the city spread before them like a glittering tapestry. For several minutes, they discussed technical aspects of her design, the innovative use of sustainable materials, the way natural light would flood the space even in winter months. "It's excellent work," Dominic concluded, surprising himself, with the genuine admiration in his voice. "But that's not the only reason I asked you here." Octavia tilted her head slightly, waiting. "I need to be honest with you about something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I knew your father better than I initially let on." Her expression remained composed, but her fingers tightened around her portfolio. "I suspected as much. Your reaction to his name was significant." Dominic nodded, rising to pace along the rooftop edge. 15 years ago, I was 25 and drowning in debt. My first development project was collapsing due to predatory financing terms I was too inexperienced to recognize. I was days away from bankruptcy when I met Hector Reed at a financial seminar. He turned to gauge her reaction. Her eyes had softened with recognition. "That sounds like Dad," she said quietly. "He was always attending those events, looking for people he could help. He approached me afterward, said he could tell I was in trouble. Within a week, he had restructured my entire financial situation, negotiated with my creditors, and connected me with legitimate investors." Dominic's voice grew distant with memory. "He refused payment, said his compensation was seeing young entrepreneurs succeed." Octavia's smile was tinged with sadness. "He believed in using his knowledge to help others. It's why he never became wealthy himself, despite his brilliance with money. I tried to find him again, years later, when Westmont had become successful. I wanted to thank him properly, maybe offer him a position." Dominic's jaw tightened. "But he'd left Philadelphia. No forwarding address." "We moved frequently," Octavia explained. "My mother was ill for many years before she passed. Dad took consulting jobs wherever he could find them to cover her medical expenses." The revelation hit Dominic with unexpected force. While he'd been building his empire, the man who'd made it possible had been struggling. "I didn't hire you because of your father," he said abruptly, needing her to understand. "I recognized your name, yes, but your portfolio speaks for itself. You earned your position." Octavia studied him for a long moment. "Then why tell me this now?" "Because I owe him a debt I can never repay," Dominic admitted. "And because you deserve to know the truth about our connection." She nodded slowly, processing his words. "Dad never mentioned you. He helped so many people over the years. He probably didn't realize the impact he had on your life." "How did he die?" Dominic asked, the question escaping before he could reconsider. Pain flashed across her features. "Heart attack. He'd been having symptoms for months but avoided doctors because of the cost. After Mom's medical bills," she trailed off, composing herself. "He left me with his knowledge and his ethics, but also significant debt. That's why this position means so much to me." Dominic felt a surge of something unfamiliar, a mixture of guilt and responsibility. "I understand." He returned to business abruptly, uncomfortable with the emotion threatening to surface. "Your design will be presented to the client next week. I expect you to lead the presentation." Surprise registered on her face. "But that's usually handled by the senior architects. Consider it an opportunity to develop the presence you supposedly lack," he replied, his tone cooler now, professional distance reinstated. "Unless you don't feel capable, A subtle change came over Octavia, a straightening of her spine, a lifting of her chin. "I'm more than capable, Mr. Vega." "Good. That will be all." After she left, Dominic remained on the rooftop, watching darkness claim the city. He'd built his success on calculation and control, never allowing emotion to influence business decisions. Yet here he was, giving special attention to Hector Reed's daughter, feeling responsible for her success. It was dangerous territory. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. Still, he couldn't ignore the debt he owed her father, or the growing respect he felt for Octavia herself. He would maintain appropriate distance, he decided. Help her, professionally, as a way of honoring her father's memory. Nothing more. But as he descended to his office, Dominic couldn't shake the image of her eyes. Intelligent, determined, and hiding depths of strength he was only beginning to recognize. Strength remarkably similar to her father's. This complication was the last thing he needed. Building bridges. The client presentation for Essex Square had concluded 30 minutes ago, yet the boardroom still buzzed with energy. Dominic observed from the doorway as Octavia answered technical questions from the investment team, her earlier nervousness replaced by composed authority. "Ms. Reed," the lead investor was saying, "your integration of community spaces with luxury elements is precisely what we've been seeking. How soon could construction begin if we greenlight this design?" Octavia didn't hesitate. "With expedited permitting, we could break ground in 4 months. I've already prepared alternative material sourcing options to mitigate supply chain disruptions." Dominic suppressed a smile. In the 3 months since hiring her, he'd watched Octavia's transformation with growing admiration. The shy architect hadn't disappeared. She still preferred quiet work to networking events, but she'd found her voice when it mattered. After the investors departed, Dominic approached as she gathered her materials. "You impress them," he said simply. Octavia looked up, a hint of pride in her expression. "Thank you for the opportunity. I know it's unusual to let someone at my level lead such a significant presentation. I don't give opportunities, Ms. Reed. I recognize talent." He paused. "Join me for lunch. There are aspects of the project we should discuss." 30 minutes later, they sat at a corner table in Dominic's preferred restaurant, an elegant space overlooking Central Park. After placing their orders, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. "This doesn't need to be awkward," Dominic said finally. "We can acknowledge our unusual connection while maintaining a professional relationship." Octavia regarded him thoughtfully. "Is that what we've been doing? Because sometimes I feel like you're watching me, waiting for me to fail or succeed in some test I don't understand." Her directness surprised him. "That's not—" "It's all right," she interrupted gently. "I understand guilt, Mr. Vega. My father helped you, and now you feel obligated to help his daughter, but I don't want special treatment. I want to earn my place." Dominic studied her, seeing beyond her reserved exterior to the strength beneath. "Your father had that same penetrating insight," he said quietly. "The ability to see through pretense." Her expression softened. "Tell me something about him, about when you knew him. Sometimes I worry my memories are fading." The request caught him off guard. "He had this habit," Dominic found himself saying, "of carrying a small notebook everywhere. When anyone mentioned a problem, he'd jot something down. I thought it was just business notes until I mentioned offhandedly that I couldn't find decent coffee near my apartment. 3 days later, he handed me a list of 5 independent cafes within walking distance of my building. He'd researched them all." Octavia's laugh was unexpected and musical. "The notebooks. I'd forgotten about those. Our house was full of them. Mom used to tease that his brain was too big to fit in his head." Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier lowering, allowing a glimpse of the person behind, the professional facade. "Essex Square isn't just another luxury development," Dominic said, returning to business but with a different tone. It's being built in a neighborhood undergoing rapid gentrification. Your community integration elements address that thoughtfully. Tell me what inspired that approach." Octavia hesitated, then spoke with quiet passion. "After Dad died, I struggled to keep our house. The neighborhood was changing. New developments, forcing out longtime residents. I watched families who'd been there for generations displaced by rising costs." She met his gaze steadily. "Architecture shouldn't just serve those who can afford luxury. It should enhance communities, not erase them." Dominic considered her words. Throughout his career, he'd focused on profitability, viewing community concerns as obstacles to overcome through minimum compliance or strategic donations. "That perspective could differentiate Westmont from our competitors," he said slowly. "Ethical development that maintains profitability while addressing community needs." "It's not just good ethics, it's good business," Octavia replied. "Developments that engage with existing communities face fewer approval delays and generate more positive press." Their conversation continued through lunch, moving from practical considerations to broader visions. For the first time, Dominic found himself truly listening to someone else's perspective, seeing his industry through fresh eyes. As they walked back to the office, Dominic made a decision. "I'm establishing a new division focused on community-integrated development. I want you to head it." Octavia stopped walking. That would be a significant promotion." "It's a significant opportunity with significant expectations," he countered. "You'd need to build a team, develop a distinctive methodology, and prove the concept's profitability within 18 months. You're serious?" It wasn't a question. "Entirely." He maintained professional distance in his tone, despite the unfamiliar warmth he felt in her presence. "Consider it carefully. I'll need your decision by Monday." That evening, alone in his penthouse, Dominic found himself thinking about Octavia's words, about the purpose of what they built. For 15 years, he'd measured success in profits and prestige. Now, he was contemplating a fundamental shift in his company's direction because of insights from a woman he'd nearly rejected at first glance. More unsettling was his growing awareness that his interest in Octavia Reed had become something more complex than professional respect or obligation to her father's memory, something he wasn't prepared to name or acknowledge. Crumbling foundations. 6 months into heading Westmont's new Community Integration Division, Octavia stood before the Planning Commission, defending their proposal for a mixed-income development in Brooklyn. The hearing room was packed with residents, developers, and media, all drawn by Westmont's unexpected shift toward socially conscious projects. "Ms. Reed," the commissioner said, leaning forward, "while your design is impressive, some have suggested this is merely a PR exercise for Westmont. How do you respond?" Octavia met his gaze steadily. "Results speak louder than intentions. We've committed to allocating 30% of units at below-market rates, establishing a neighborhood improvement fund, and preserving the historic community center. Whether you believe our motives are pure or pragmatic, the community benefits remain the same." From the back of the room, Dominic watched with undisguised pride. The woman commanding the room bore little resemblance to the hesitant architect, who'd first entered his office. Her division had exceeded every metric he'd established, attracting new investors and generating unprecedented positive press for Westmont. More surprising was how her philosophy had begun influencing his own thinking. Their weekly strategy sessions had evolved into wide-ranging conversations about architecture's social responsibility, often continuing through dinner and late into the evening. After the commission granted preliminary approval, Dominic joined Octavia as she gathered her presentation materials. "Impressive performance," he said. "You've won over the most skeptical commissioner in the city." Her smile was radiant. "We've won the first battle, not the war. There's still the environmental, impact assessment, and community feedback sessions. I have complete confidence in your ability to navigate those challenges. He checked his watch. Dinner? We should discuss next steps. Later that evening, seated at a small Italian restaurant they'd come to favor, the conversation flowed easily between professional matters and personal reflections. Over tiramisu, Dominic found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about growing up in a decaying Rust Belt town, about his mother working multiple jobs after his father abandoned them, about his desperate determination to create security. Through success? Is that why you built those walls around yourself? Octavia asked softly. To protect what you've built? The question pierced him unexpectedly. Perhaps, he admitted. Though I'd say it's more practical than psychological. Trust is a liability in business. Yet you trusted my father immediately, she pointed out. A stranger who approached you at a seminar. Dominic considered this. There was something about him, an integrity I recognized instinctively. His eyes met hers. The same quality I see in you. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Octavia's phone chimed with a message. Breaking the tension. It's from Jasper, she said, referring to her assistant. The community center director just sent over historical documents that might impact our design approach. He's left them on my desk. We should review them tonight, Dominic decided. This project's timeline is already tight. An hour later, they were in her office, poring over faded photographs and newspaper clippings documenting the Brooklyn neighborhood's evolution. As Dominic reached for a folder, he accidentally knocked over a stack of papers on her desk. Bending to retrieve them, he froze at the sight of a familiar document. It was a printout of an old Philadelphia newspaper article featuring a much younger version of himself standing beside Hector Reed. The headline read, Local Financial Consultant Saves Entrepreneur from Bankruptcy. What is this? He asked, his voice suddenly cool. Octavia looked up, her expression shifting from confusion to realization. Oh, I was researching Dad's career after our conversation. I found that article in the archives. Dominic straightened, the warmth of moments earlier replaced by guarded suspicion. How long have you had this? A few months, she admitted. I was curious about your connection. A few months. He set the article down carefully. Before or after I offered you the division leadership? Understanding dawned in her eyes. You think I've been manipulating you? Using our connection to advance my career? Have you? His tone was clipped, professional distance reinstated like a shield. How could you ask that? Hurt flashed across her features. After everything we've... She stopped, regaining composure. I found that article because I wanted to know more about my father's life. The parts I missed while I was away at college, the people he helped. That's all. Yet you never mentioned finding it. Dominic's expression hardened. We've spoken of your father numerous times, but you kept this discovery to yourself. Why? Because I didn't want to be defined by my father's actions or your debt to him. Her voice rose slightly, then settled. I wanted to succeed on my own merits, to be seen for my work, not our connection. The explanation was reasonable, logical, yet Dominic couldn't silence the voice of caution that had guided him for decades. He'd let his guard down, allowed himself to feel something beyond professional respect for Octavia. Now he questioned whether he'd been manipulated by sentimentality and obligation. I need to consider what this means for our working relationship, he said formally. In the meantime, continue with the Brooklyn project as planned. Dominic, she said, the first time she'd used his given name. Don't do this. Don't retreat behind those walls again. He met her gaze one last time, conflicting, emotions warring within him. Good night, Ms. Reed. Over the following 2 weeks, Dominic limited their interactions to necessary professional communications, always with others present. He buried himself in work, ignoring the hollow feeling that had replaced their easy camaraderie. The Brooklyn project continued advancing under Octavia's leadership, but the connection between them, Whatever it had been becoming lay fractured by mistrust. Then came the letter that would change everything. Structural integrity rain lashed against the windows of Dominic's penthouse as he stared at the letter in his hands. The return address was from a law firm he didn't recognize, but the contents had shaken him to his core. The package had arrived. That morning, a letter from Hector Reed, written shortly before his death 3 years ago, held by his attorney with instructions to forward it to Dominic Vega if his daughter ever crossed paths with the businessman. "If you're reading this," Hector had written, "then Octavia has somehow entered your orbit, and my attorney has fulfilled his promise. I've followed your success from afar, Dominic. You built something meaningful, as I knew you would." The letter continued, detailing Hector's pride in his daughter's talents and his regret that financial circumstances had limited her opportunities. He explained his decision never to contact Dominic again after their initial meeting. "I didn't want you to feel indebted. What I did for you wasn't charity but investment in potential I recognized immediately. Most devastating was the final paragraph. I've never told Octavia about you. If she discovers our connection, it won't be through me. My greatest hope is that she'll make her own way, recognized for her brilliance rather than as an object of obligation. If your paths cross, I ask only that you judge her on her own merits, nothing more, nothing less." Enclosed with the letter was a faded photograph of Hector with a teenage Octavia at her high school graduation, her face alight with the same quiet determination Dominic had come to admire. He set down the letter, overwhelmed by the realization of how completely he had misjudged the situation and how thoroughly he had wounded someone who deserved better. His phone rang. It was Patricia, his executive assistant. "Sir, there's a situation at the Brooklyn site. Ms. Reed has been trying to reach you." 20 minutes later, Dominic arrived at the development site to find it in controlled chaos. Heavy rains had caused unexpected flooding in the excavation area, threatening both the construction timeline and the adjacent community center's foundation. Octavia stood in the downpour, directing the emergency response team, her clothing soaked, but her focus absolute. When she spotted Dominic, surprise flickered across her features before she returned to the crisis at hand. "The water main break is compromising the community center's east wall," she explained, professional despite their strained relationship. "We're implementing emergency stabilization, but we need to approve additional resources immediately." "Whatever you need," Dominic replied without hesitation. "Save that building." For the next 14 hours, they worked side by side, coordinating with structural engineers, city officials, and community leaders. Octavia's foresight in developing contingency plans proved invaluable, her calm leadership steadying the team through the crisis. By dawn, the immediate danger had passed. The community center stood secure, protected by innovative emergency reinforcements Octavia had designed on site. As the first light of morning broke through dispersing clouds, they found themselves alone, on the rooftop of the community center, surveying the damage and recovery efforts below. "Thank you for coming," Octavia said, breaking the silence between them. "I wasn't sure you would." "I should never have doubted you," Dominic replied. "I received a letter from your father yesterday." Her eyes widened. "From my father? How is that possible?" He explained about the letter, watching her expression shift from confusion to understanding. "He never told me about you," she said softly. "All those conversations about his work, and he never mentioned saving the great Dominic Vega." "He wanted you to succeed on your own terms," Dominic replied. "As you have. Your leadership today, that had nothing to do with your father or me. That was all Octavia Reed." She turned to face him fully. "Why did you really pull away? Was it just the article, or was it something more?" Dominic hesitated, then chose honesty. "I've built my life around control and calculation. Then you appeared, and suddenly I was making decisions based on feelings I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge. When I saw that article, it gave me an excuse to retreat to familiar territory. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the sounds of recovery work below. "Now I understand what your father knew 15 years ago, that sometimes the greatest risk is refusing to take one." He stepped closer. "I built Westmont by trusting no one. You've shown me there's strength in building bridges instead of walls." The morning light caught in her eyes as she studied him. "Are you talking about architecture or something else entirely?" "Both," he admitted. "Octavia, I've spent weeks trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is professional admiration or obligation to your father's memory. It's neither. It's something I've never felt before, something I'd like to explore if you're willing." "What about professional boundaries?" she challenged, though he could see hope in her expression. "The complications of a personal relationship between us?" "We'll navigate them thoughtfully," he said, "just as we've navigated everything else. Together." She smiled then, the full, uninhibited smile he'd grown to cherish. "My father would have liked the man you've become, Dominic. Not because of your success, but because of your capacity to change." "I wish I could thank him," Dominic said quietly. "We can." Octavia gestured to the community below, where residents had gathered to help with cleanup efforts. "Every project that serves both profit and people, every development that builds community instead of displacing it, that's our thank you to him." Dominic looked at the woman before him, brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than he'd ever initially recognized, and felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble away. "There's something else I'd like to build," he said, taking her hand in his. "Something that might take a lifetime to complete." Her fingers tightened around his. "I've always appreciated ambitious architecture." As the sun rose fully over Brooklyn, illuminating the neighborhood they were helping to preserve and enhance, Dominic understood what Hector Reed had meant about building something meaningful. It wasn't just about structures of steel and glass, but about connections between communities, between past and future, and between two people who had found each other against impossible odds. In rejecting Octavia that first day, he would have rejected not just Hector's legacy, but his own chance at a life richer than he'd ever imagined possible. Instead, together they would build something neither could create alone, a future where success was measured not just in profit, but in purpose and love.